Graceland never sleeps. Even though the man crowned the king of rock and roll lay still in the cold bathroom on the second floor, that house kept whispering. The red velvet walls, the endless hallway like the mouth of a drugged-out beast, and the piano he last played Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain on, all of it remembered. But only the things the living no longer wanted to mention. August 16, 1977. 2:30 p.m. Ginger Alden screamed. The bodyguard kicked down the door. Elvis lay face down, his face pressed against the tile floor. No pulse. No breath. No one left to sing Love Me Tender just one more time. But that was only the end. This story started long before. It started with the first pills, the first kisses, and the first lies. The cops were late. The doctor arrived too late. The media was muzzled. The autopsy report was doctored. The body was caked in makeup so thick no one dared ask why. Heart failure, they said. Natural causes, they wrote. But those closest to Elvis, from the bodyguard, the lovers, to the personal doctor, all knew nothing about the king's death was natural. Something killed Elvis. Slowly. Piece by piece. Like poison dripping through the days. He didn't die from one reckless night. He died from a lifetime no one controlled. He didn't die because he loved too much. He died because he was never truly loved as a man. In Elvis's bedroom drawer, police found more than a dozen prescriptions, all written by the same doctor. Some dated the day before, some from weeks earlier, and some expired from the year before. In the suitcase he carried on tour, hundreds of pills in every color: white to stay awake, blue to sleep, orange for pain, pink to soothe the soul. His career was powered by music, but his existence maintained by drugs. Under its glossy paint, Graceland was an unmarked hospital. But the real question was, why did no one stop him? Colonel Tom Parker, the Dutch circus man posing as an American, who pulled Elvis's strings like a cruel magician. Priscilla Presley, the young wife caught in a twisted relationship at 14, leaving with a shattered heart. Linda Thompson, Ginger Alden, women who came and went, leaving behind a man who didn't know how to live alone, or with anyone. Every witness had their own Elvis. But no one knew the real one, not even him. In an old bodyguard's diary, ink black, undated, one passage chilled to the bone. Elvis didn't sleep anymore. He only closed his eyes. Every night. He woke up asking me, "Am I really alive?" I didn't know what to say, because I wasn't sure either. And in a banned 1978 interview, Dr. George Nikopoulos, Dr. Nick, accused of writing over 10,000 prescriptions in 2 years, said one thing before hanging up. I don't think Elvis wanted to die. But I think he didn't want to live that way one more day. The story you're about to hear isn't meant to harm a legend. It's to understand why that legend slowly destroyed himself. You'll walk the hallways of Graceland where no camera was allowed. You'll hear whispered confessions behind the stage lights. You'll see an Elvis Presley you were never supposed to know, fragile, addicted, desperately lonely. And in the end, you'll have to ask yourself, did Elvis die because of pills, love, or because we loved him all wrong? No door in Graceland was ever locked from the inside except Elvis's bedroom door. And his heart. The White Mansion in Memphis, Tennessee looked like an American castle straight out of the 50s. Symmetrical facade, Roman columns, black tiled roof, walls adorned with badges and animal pelts. But it wasn't a place for love. It was a bunker. A tomb for the living. The women who walked into Graceland didn't just enter the domain of a legend, they stepped into the labyrinth of an emotional addict, where love was a drug, and sex a temporary painkiller. Elvis was 24. Priscilla was just 14. Their fateful meeting happened in Germany, where Elvis was serving in the U.S. Army. Priscilla Beaulieu, the daughter of an Air Force officer, showed up at a party with light brown hair, porcelain skin, and eyes sparkling with unspoiled innocence. She was like a frozen dream, and Elvis, freshly uprooted from glamorous America to the cold military base, was instantly drawn to her naivete. From that first encounter, Elvis took charge, pursuing her relentlessly, convincing her family with his fame and charm. And from then on, a process of molding began. Priscilla was not allowed to grow into a normal young woman. She was trained like a carefully cast role. Modest clothes, no heavy makeup, no personal freedom, no resistance. She was the ideal wife role, a living plaster statue. When Priscilla was brought to Graceland in 1963, Elvis ordered her room redesigned, controlled what she read, listened to, and who she spoke to. Dates were supervised. The first nights were without intimacy. Her purity was preserved like a jewel to honor Elvis's ownership. They married in 1967, but the marriage never had a healthy emotional root. Priscilla wrote in her memoir that Elvis stopped touching her right after she gave birth to their daughter Lisa Marie. He said, "You're the mother of my child. I can't do that with you anymore." He turned Priscilla into a saintly icon, then rejected her as a real woman. Meanwhile, outside the bedroom door, dozens of other women were brought in, quick, discreet, silent. Like the times Elvis changed his meds. Priscilla finally left Graceland in 1972 after an affair with her karate instructor, a last desperate act of a woman trapped too long. But even after leaving, she remained a ghost haunting every sorrowful love song Elvis sang. Anne Margaret didn't come to Graceland silently. She stormed in like a blazing red tempest, fiery red hair, burning eyes, confident sway. She was the female lead in the 1964 film Viva Las Vegas, but quickly became Elvis's real-life leading lady. Between them was a chemistry so explosive the director had to rewrite the script to tone down their furtive glances on screen. The crew whispered about long nights they disappeared from the set, about mornings when Anne emerged from Elvis's room in silk pajamas, still undone. Unlike Priscilla, Anne Margaret refused to be turned into a wax figure. She smoked in front of him. She went out late with friends. She challenged Elvis's control, and that drove him both mad and afraid. Their relationship was a battlefield. Every time Elvis left her, he called back. Every time Anne went silent, he sent flowers. Once, he sent a Harley Davidson to her doorstep, with no note, just his signature cologne scent. Love letters were handwritten, hidden, burned when Priscilla nearly found out. But in Elvis's mind, Anne was always the exception, the woman he could never hold, and therefore never forget. In 1972, after his marriage to Priscilla collapsed, Elvis entered the darkest chapter of his life. That's when Linda Thompson appeared. Linda wasn't a star. She was a former Tennessee beauty queen, smart, calm, attentive, patient. She didn't wait to be loved, she chose to care. When Elvis couldn't sleep, she read to him. When he suffered headaches from drug withdrawals, she made lemon water, chilled compresses, and spoke as if soothing a child. But that motherly love twisted their relationship. Linda was no longer a girlfriend, she became a nurse, a psychological bodyguard. She controlled his medications, cleaned up the aftermath of his overdose nights. She once stood between two giant bodyguards to stop Elvis from pulling a gun during a hallucination. One night in 1975, Elvis woke from a dream, stared at Linda, and asked, "You'll leave me like all the rest, won't you?" She didn't answer. But yes, 1 year later, she left Graceland silently. carrying an unnamed sorrow. Not because she stopped loving, but because she knew no one can save a man who doesn't want to be saved. Ginger Alden is a strange chapter. 20 years younger than Elvis, a model and local beauty queen, Ginger entered Elvis's life like a fresh breeze, gentle and somewhat vague. Her family wasn't close to Graceland. Elvis's inner circle doubted her motives. But Elvis found in Ginger a false peace, as if he wanted a fresh start when it was already too late. Ginger was the last person to see Elvis alive and the one who found his body, slumped in the bathroom on the morning of August 16, 1977. But even at the end, the distance between them remained. Ginger never stayed at Graceland for many consecutive nights. She never stepped into the inner world that the other women once knew intimately. For many, Ginger was just a witness, not a victim. But in Elvis's tragic portrait, she is the final full stop. After his death, Ginger was viciously attacked by media and fans. They blamed her, accused her, spun wild stories. But those who lived in Graceland knew, if not Ginger, it would have been someone else. Elvis had chosen his day to leave this world long before. No one just heard the signal clearly. Deep inside Graceland's archives, among white stage suits and golden memorabilia, lie unissued cassette tapes. It is Elvis's voice, monologuing on sleepless nights. When the drugs made his head hazy but his heart screamed questions with no answers. A 1976 recording. I don't know how to love without destroying. I don't know how to hold someone without hurting them. Maybe I was born to sing about love, but never really understand it. A psychologist who heard the tape said, Elvis wasn't addicted to women, he was addicted to the illusion of being loved forever. In his final years, no one could tell if Elvis was in love or just intoxicated. Women came and went like fresh prescriptions, effective for weeks, until his emotional body became immune. When love wasn't thrilling enough, Elvis turned back to morphine, Demerol, Valium, a list as long as a blues song about despair. And he didn't just use them to sleep. He used them to forget. To erase the face of the one who left his bed the night before. To blur the haunting questions when darkness fell, is this time real? Does she love me, or the name on the album cover? But no matter how high the dosage, the doubts survived. They pulled Elvis away from every connection, like a stranded fish slowly crawling out of the water, fearing it would be swallowed whole. People once asked, why couldn't Elvis, a legend with everything, keep a woman by his side? The answer might be, he didn't need a woman, he needed a sedative. And when that sedative lost its effect, he chased another dose. To Elvis, women weren't companions. They were temporary mirrors, reflecting who he once was, who he wanted to be. But the longer he looked, the more cracks he saw. The deeper his despair that he was no longer the king in his own eyes. Elvis didn't need love. He needed to be idolized, and by the end, only drugs made him feel alive. Love in Graceland was never meant to nurture. It was used, twisted, drained dry. From Priscilla to Anne Margaret, from Linda to Ginger, each came into Elvis's life with hope and left with scars. But the one hurt the most was Elvis himself. Deep inside was a child who never grew up, endlessly seeking a mother in every lover, and death in every embrace. If love was a drug, Elvis overdosed long before he ever touched morphine. It wasn't heroin. It wasn't cocaine. Nor LSD. Elvis chose prescription drugs, the easy-to-get, legal kind, stashed in every drawer at Graceland. And most importantly, the kind no one thought could kill a king. Graceland had bedrooms, music rooms, sitting rooms, but the most important room was in the basement, a small, locked chamber holding hundreds of bottles, dubbed the private medical room. But don't be fooled by the name. This wasn't a place for healing. It was a dispensing room for a patient who never wanted to get well. When Elvis first rose to fame in the early 50s, his body was a perfect product: flat stomach, broad shoulders, glossy black hair, skin white as wax. But that perfection wasn't natural. It was a campaign: weight-controlled, food-controlled, sleep-controlled, caffeine-controlled, alcohol-controlled, and especially drugs. At first, amphetamines to fuel endless tours stretching for months. Then barbiturates to sleep after nights spiraling out of control. And then Valium, Demerol, Placidil, Quaalude. Percodan. Elvis knew every drug name, every dose, every feeling each one brought. A medical vocabulary not meant for doctors, but for a man dissecting himself from the inside. Once, a friend asked him why he didn't try to quit. Elvis just smiled, quietly breaking a green Placidil in half, placing one half on his tongue like a ritual. "I'm not addicted. I'm just trying to survive." What would you do if every time you stepped on stage, tens of thousands screamed like a god had descended, but inside your head, it's just hollow echoes like a morgue? By the 70s, Elvis no longer performed for passion, he performed for drugs. Every show was a cycle: pills to stay awake before going on stage, pills to get high while performing, pills to sleep afterward, then pills to wake early the next morning. At some point, he lost track of whether he took them for headaches or because he was scared to be awake. Elvis's personal doctor, George Nick Nikopoulos, was a complicated figure. In medical records, he was responsible for Elvis's prescriptions from 1967 until his death. But to friends and Graceland staff, Dr. Nick was the man who kept death waiting outside the door and the man who sometimes opened it. Dr. Nick once told the press, "I wasn't here to cure Elvis. I was here to keep him standing, at least until the music stopped." In 1975 alone, Dr. Nick prescribed Elvis over 10,000 pills, a number even he later admitted was insane. But at the time, Elvis didn't just ask for pills, he demanded them like a star demanding the spotlight, impossible to refuse. Elvis once flew his doctor from Memphis to Palm Springs just to get a new prescription. Once, sitting on the floor, crying, he pleaded with Dr. Nick, "If you care about me, give me something that lets me forget who I am, just for a few hours." Dr. Nick's reasoning sounded reasonable. "I'd rather keep him on controlled meds than find him dead in a hotel bathroom in Nevada." But that reasoning cost him his medical license after Elvis's death, landed him under investigation for prescription abuse, and earned him a place in history as a fallen angel in a white coat. From 1973 to 1977, Elvis's appearance changed so drastically that fans barely recognized him. His face swollen from fluid retention. His belly swollen like he was pregnant. Yellowed skin. Hair falling out in patches. His voice hoarse, sometimes choking like someone suffocating in a nightmare. A tour manager recalled, "We had to assign a nurse 24/7 not to care for his health, but to make sure he didn't die en route to the stage." Once, Elvis collapsed in the Hilton Las Vegas bathroom. Staff found him wearing only a robe, eyes wide open, mouth still stained with pills. But the next morning, there he was, sharp, hair slicked back, standing on stage, smiling like nothing had happened. A backstage crew member recalled a night Elvis sat slumped in the bathroom 40 minutes before showtime. He sat there trembling, eyes unfocused. I'm not sure he knew where he was. But when he heard the crowd screaming outside, he forced himself up, fixed his hair, and walked out like a king. It was the strangest thing I ever saw, like he could only live under the spotlight. Elvis was dying from the inside, his liver damaged, digestion failing, nervous system deteriorating. But what kept him going was the crowd's gaze, the addiction to applause. The hallucination that just one more pill would bring him back. One of Elvis's closest bodyguards, Red West, wrote in his memoir, There were nights Elvis swallowed over 10 barbiturates. Then Valium to balance out, then a pill for nausea, then one for headaches. No one could control him anymore. He didn't need to sleep. He needed to disappear for a few hours. Graceland, once a lavish mansion, became a doctorless emergency room. The bodyguards learned to tell pills by color, helping Elvis dose himself by the hour. Once, he took 2 drugs that clashed and stopped breathing for 30 seconds. They didn't call an ambulance, they called Dr. Nick, hoping God hadn't closed the door yet. Ginger Alden, Elvis's last lover, once said, there were nights he stayed awake till dawn, reading books in the bathroom, clutching his pill bottle like a talisman. He said, only when I sleep does everything stop being scary. But he never slept. He only drifted into another kind of nightmare. On the night of August 15, 1977, Elvis went to bed after a violent craving. Ginger was the last to see him reading in the bathroom. The next morning, August 16, she found him collapsed on the floor, blood coming from his nose, body cold as stone. No light, no applause. Just a body that was once a god, now a testament to a decade-long addiction. The autopsy later revealed, his blood contained at least 14 different drugs, enough to kill 3 healthy men. Not a suicide. Not an accident. Just an ending written in white pills, day after day, night after night. Graceland remains. But the small basement room, once stuffed with bottles, is now locked forever. No plaque, no relics. Just cold darkness. Like Elvis in his final years, living in the spotlight, dying in the shadows. If Graceland was a fortress, its walls guarded nothing but the wind. Because what truly hunted Elvis wasn't from outside. It wasn't the paparazzi, nor the crazed fans, nor the media swarm. It was the silent shadows lurking in mirrors, in dreams, in every glance cast toward the past. The ghosts of fame, of dead love. And of the man himself, the young man who once held everything in the palm of his hand. But those hands now trembled, curled up, and were utterly empty. No one can outrun themselves. But Elvis tried. Tried to the point of madness. After 1975, Elvis stopped looking in mirrors, at least not by choice. Every morning, the housekeeper was ordered to draw the curtains tight. Turn off every hallway light, and absolutely never let a single mirror catch his eye. Not out of vanity, but because every time he saw himself, he saw a stranger, fat, exhausted, soulless, pretending to be Elvis Presley. They say once a friend brought him a silver comb and accidentally left it next to a small mirror in his pocket. Elvis glanced over, paused silently for a few seconds, then hurled the mirror against the wall. He screamed, "I don't know who he is. I don't know who he is," before collapsing to the floor like a man struck down. Graceland, the rock and roll castle, had turned into a haunted house where time froze and everything bore the stain of tarnished memories. Faint yellow lights flickered. Footsteps echoed down empty halls, and the air smelled of antiseptic mixed with Old Spice cologne. Elvis wandered alone through the rooms like a lost soul. Sometimes standing for hours before an old photo, him and Priscilla, smiling under the California sun. People say he once sat like that all night, his hands shaking like he had seizures, whispering, "Why did you leave?" Once, his personal doctor found him pressing his forehead against a dusty windowpane, eyes red, breathing ragged as if fleeing from something unseen. When asked if he was okay, Elvis smiled faintly and said, "I'm trying to remember what it felt like to be myself." But Priscilla was only part of it. The real problem ran deeper, in the emptiness fame had left behind. After it had gnawed away everything human inside him. No matter how many women passed through Elvis's life, they were all just illusions, briefly shimmering, then fading like cigarette smoke in neon light. Ginger Alden was the last. Before her, there was Linda Thompson, before that Sheila Ryan, and further back, Anne Margaret, the female Elvis. The woman he once planned to marry if things had gone differently. Each affair was a beautiful note in a sad song, then silence swallowed it whole. Anne Margaret once said in an interview after Elvis died, "I think deep down, Elvis had a good heart. But it was like it was trapped in concrete, he didn't know how to love without destroying." Elvis didn't betray these women, he simply forgot them. Each came and went like a sedative, soothing him for a few weeks, then growing faint, blurry like shadows in a fevered dream. No one truly touched him, because Elvis was no longer the man who could love, he was a legend boxed in, imprisoned inside the mask he'd built. Linda Thompson wrote in her memoir that Elvis once held her and cried after a seizure. He said, "I'm sorry. I'm not the man I'm supposed to be. I used to be better. I used to be Elvis Presley." That wasn't an excuse. It was desperation from a man who no longer recognized himself. A man lost in a maze with no exit, only old wounds that refused to heal. And Ginger, the woman said to be his final fiancée, later revealed in her memoir that on their last night together, Elvis barely spoke. He sat silently, his sunken eyes gripping her hand like a lifeline. "I felt like I was with someone about to dissolve into thin air," she wrote. Like he was no longer really here. Everyone close to him agreed. The death of Gladys Presley, Elvis's mother, in 1958 was the turning point from which he never returned. Gladys was more than a mother, she was a confidant, a refuge. The only person Elvis let see him when he was weak, scared, the little boy from Tupelo who didn't yet understand fame or darkness. When Gladys died, Elvis screamed, banged his head against walls, collapsed by her coffin, and for years after, he dreamed of her every night. He built a special room to keep her belongings, spoke to her photographs as if she were still alive. Asked why he wouldn't throw away his mother's old things, he shook his head, "If I forget Mom, I forget who I am." A former bodyguard recalled once seeing Elvis clutch a pillow, whispering, "Mom, I'm so tired. Why don't you come and get me?" That wasn't just a lament, it was a plea sent to a place that would never answer. After his mother's death, Elvis was no longer a man who could stand tall. He was a child frozen beside a coffin, unwilling to leave. The women who came after, knowingly or not, were cast as replacements for Gladys. But no one could fill that role without breaking. How do you love a man who's always searching for a woman long gone in every face he sees? Toward the end, Elvis sank deeper into superstition, mysticism, and half-learned spiritual teachings. He read the Bible alongside books on ancient Egypt, believed in reincarnation, past lives, and supernatural energy. Once at dinner, he declared, "I'm an old soul. I was an emperor once. I'm just coming home to my rightful place." A close bodyguard recalled, he'd be eating a hamburger, then suddenly stop, look off into space, and say, "I hear them. They're calling me." I asked who, and he said, "Voices from the other side. They say I don't have much time left." Elvis lived increasingly in his own world, where spirits spoke to him, stars dictated his career, and mysterious books pointed the way to eternity. He talked to himself, preached philosophy in empty rooms, filled notebooks with cryptic prophecies no one could decipher. One night, he asked his doctor, "If I die, can you keep my soul here at Graceland?" The doctor laughed, thinking it a joke. But Elvis's eyes weren't joking. Graceland was once the symbol of the American dream, a poor boy from Tupelo rising to become a king. But by 1977, it was more a gilded prison than a palace. Cameras in every room, guards on every corridor. But the only prisoner was Elvis. Locked inside his image, his expectations. the overwhelming shadow of himself. He didn't leave the house for weeks. Every meal was served like a king's feast, but it was all junk food, mixed with sleeping pills and sedatives. He no longer listened to music, no longer sang, no longer played guitar. The man who once enchanted millions now just sat in one place, draped in silk robes, dreaming of a time he could never return to. In a half-finished letter found after his death, Elvis wrote, "I once believed I was born to change the world. Now, I just want to sleep alone. Long sleep with no dreams." Maybe that's exactly what he did on his last night. And maybe, in that sleep, the final ghosts finally fell silent. If ghosts are what haunted the mirrors, then pills were Elvis's only way to look away. Each dose, each tranquilizer, every drop of painkiller became the final symphony of his life, a symphony with no audience, no reprise, and only a lingering note of despair. It started innocently enough. Mild sleeping aids to rest through the night, a few painkillers for a weary spine, a steroid or two to keep the voice from faltering mid-tour. Then stimulants to stay awake when his body screamed for sleep. Elvis never realized he was drafting his own obituary, line by line. Dose by dose, composed entirely of chemicals supplied by his trusted physician. Each prescription, disguised as a lifeline, was, in truth, a blade sinking deeper into the heart. Each pill turned the exhausted artist into a corpse that could still sing, smile, and beg, but couldn't escape the trap of addiction. Dr. George C. Nichopoulos, better known as Dr. Nick, was no stranger to this tragedy. Elvis's personal physician, medical advisor, and the man who fed him pills for almost a decade, Dr. Nick had the look of a toothpaste commercial. Gleaming white teeth, a spotless lab coat, and a gaze that could fake warmth when needed. He was the poster child for medical negligence dressed in clinical precision. Between 1970 and 1977, Elvis Presley received over 12,000 prescriptions, most of them signed by Dr. Nick himself. These pills weren't just numbing pain, they were bullets, hollow-tipped, firing straight at the king's vitality. In court, the doctor claimed, "I only did what my patient asked." Elvis was in deep pain, physically, emotionally. But the industry knew better. It was a dirty compromise between a star desperate to forget and a doctor too willing to supply the means. A former bodyguard once said, "Elvis didn't ask for pills. He gave orders. And Dr. Nick obeyed." Once, when the doctor refused to write another script, Elvis hurled an ashtray at his head. Nobody said no to the king. Dr. Nick orchestrated a cocktail of death in those final months. Valium for the anxiety, Placidil for sleep, Dilaudid, an incredibly potent opioid for the pain, and Dexedrine to jolt him awake before each show. The volume was so immense that nurses had to number the bottles just to avoid fatal mix-ups. But safety was a distant echo, nobody cared anymore. A day in Elvis Presley's life didn't begin with fresh coffee. It began with a painkiller. And it didn't end with familiar melodies, but with another round of sleeping pills. Eventually, he couldn't function without them. He wasn't living anymore. He was breathing in chemical purgatory. By 1976 to 1977, the final tours were already a funeral procession. He wasn't on stage because he wanted to be, he was bound by contracts, financial pressure, and a delusion that the glory days were still within reach. Those tours were zombie performances. Elvis no longer danced across the stage, he wobbled, a crumbling statue of his former self. A backup singer once recalled a show in Baltimore. Elvis showed up nearly an hour late. When he walked on, he was trembling, drenched in sweat, leaning on the mic stand like it was the only thing holding him up. His voice cracked. He forgot lyrics and mumbled, "I don't remember." "Someone help me out here?" The audience still clapped. Not for the music, but to witness the collapse of a god. They came to see the end. Backstage, Elvis needed injections, 4 drips, and adrenaline shots just to stand. He wore a sequined white jumpsuit with dramatic cuts, oversized sunglasses shielding empty, glassy eyes. One time, just minutes before showtime, he collapsed in the bathroom. No one knew. By the time someone found him, they had to medicate him enough just to prop him up again. The final tour, June 1977 in Rapid City, was nothing short of a mobile wake. The live recording of Unchained Melody that night sounded like a tearful farewell. His voice was hoarse, his breath heavy, his hands shaking at the piano. But for one fleeting moment, that legendary voice flickered back to life. A final flame before the eternal blackout. In his last months, Elvis had ballooned to over 330 pounds. Beneath the luxurious robes was a bloated, sick body plagued by heart disease, hypertension, liver stress, and chronic constipation. But the real horror wasn't in the body. It was in the mind. He was paranoid, delusional, screaming at night, convinced people were spying on him or trying to kill him. One night, he summoned a bodyguard, claiming he heard whispers under the floorboards. When the guard found nothing, Elvis pulled a gun and fired into the wall, mumbling, "They're gone now." Good. Every pill swallowed was another signature on his death certificate. But no one, lover, doctor, or friend, dared to stop him. They watched a man dying in slow motion and could do nothing. A staff member at Graceland once found Elvis unconscious at the bottom of a staircase, lying there for hours. When he came to, he had no memory of the fall. No blood. Just a neural collapse, another fragment of the king's soul slipping away. August 16, 1977. Memphis choked under a hellish sun. Elvis woke late, complained of stomach pain, and retreated into the bathroom, clutching a book titled The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus. A haunting image, a lost man seeking holiness amidst the decay of fame. Ginger Alden, his young lover, noticed his prolonged silence. After hours, she broke down the bathroom door. Elvis lay sprawled on the floor, head against the tub, eyes wide open, staring into the abyss. His skin was going cold, lips blue, nails darkened. The end wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. Paramedics arrived with resignation. One said Elvis looked like he'd been dead for hours. They rushed him anyway, but Hope was already a corpse. The official cause? Cardiac arrest. But independent reports stated that his stomach contained over 10 different medications, a blend potent enough to kill any ordinary man, let alone a dying legend. Elvis Presley's death wasn't just the passing of a man. It was the crumbling of an icon. News spread like wildfire. Fans flooded Graceland, weeping, lighting candles, leaving flowers, photos, and pills. The same kind Elvis had relied on to survive his last days. His funeral on August 18, 1977, turned into a national spectacle. Tens of thousands came to mourn and say goodbye. But amidst the sea of grief, someone took a photo of Elvis in the coffin, his lips painted pink, skin powdered white. The image made its way to tabloids, igniting outrage. Even in death, Hollywood refused to release him. They dressed him up one last time, like he was still performing for the spotlight. Some refused to believe he had died. Conspiracy theories blossomed. He faked his death to escape fame. He lived in Argentina. He retired to a secret island in Hawaii. Every year, hundreds claim to have seen him in gas stations, supermarkets, or lounging on distant beaches. Maybe it's because the truth was just too brutal. A man who once shook the world, who lit up a generation, had died alone, slumped in a bathroom, with a book about Jesus and no one to stop the fall. "Don't be cruel," Elvis once sang, a plea for youth, love, and mercy. But life was merciless. Fame was unkind. The cruelty wasn't one dramatic blow. It was slow erosion. Hour by hour, pill by pill. Like a clock ticking backwards toward the void. If music was the soul's last confession, then Elvis's voice, though broken and gasping, still had moments of aching truth. In his final recording, he sang, "I'll hold you in my heart, till I can hold you in my arms." But he would never hold anyone again. Only the silence clung to him. Silence wrapped in silk robes and powdered cheeks, cracked under the weight of addiction, and embalmed in the myth of a man who couldn't stop performing even as he died. A love song interrupted, cut short by chemistry, shattered promises, and a loneliness that not even the king could escape. Elvis Presley, the name that echoes across generations, is not just an icon of rock and roll but a mirror reflecting the pain, loneliness, and tragedy hidden beneath the dazzling lights of fame. His life, from a poor boy in Tupelo to the very top of the global music industry, was a mournful symphony, where every bright crescendo was shadowed by darker, aching notes of sorrow. Born into poverty in Mississippi, where rickety wooden shacks couldn't shelter a body, let alone a soul, Elvis was the image of humble beginnings. He grew up in the arms of a simple, loving family, surviving days of scarcity, bolstered only by the warmth of kinship. But even then, in that bare, cracked world, a yearning ignited within him, a hunger to rise above, to grasp the stars with both hands and never let go. Elvis didn't just want to sing. He wanted to break barriers. His voice, a unique fusion of blues, gospel, and country, wasn't just music. It was the cry of a restless generation, lost somewhere between post-war conformity and the dawn of rebellion. Yet fate had marked him early. From his childhood, he watched his parents struggle, arguments over money, nights filled with quiet dread, and dreams shelved for survival. And in those silent prayers, he promised himself the world would know his name, and no one would ever look down on the poor kid from Tupelo again. The first time Elvis took the stage, his eyes were alight, his heart overflowing with hope. The way he moved, the way he sang, it was electric. He didn't just perform, he erupted. His fire swept through jukeboxes, diners, dance halls, and living rooms. He took rock and roll from dusty cafes and hurled it into the bloodstream of America, then the world. But all light casts a shadow. Fame came fast, hard, and heavy. Beneath the glare of stage lights, Elvis bore a weight few could comprehend, pressures from the media, from family, from adoring fans, and from himself. Loneliness crept in slowly, like smoke under a door. There was applause all around. But inside, the silence deepened. Night after night, in cold hotel rooms that never felt like home, Elvis faced fatigue and the creeping pull of pills that promised rest but delivered fog. Those shadows of uncertainty grew thicker with time. He wasn't just an artist, he was a man, one slowly crushed beneath the golden crown he wore. He loved many women, but the love he received in return was often tangled in heartbreak. From Priscilla to the unnamed women who walked briefly through his life, Elvis gave all of himself, only to lose what he cherished most. He lived with an open heart but rarely found anyone who could stay long enough to fill it. Every goodbye was another cut. The smiling face on stage belied a man drowning in sorrow. Priscilla once said that even during their best years, it felt like Elvis existed in another world, a place she could never quite enter. His relationships were not fairy tales. They were battlegrounds where love fought constantly with the suffocating grip of fame. Elvis was a man trapped between two realms: the spotlight and the shadows within. Elvis Presley's life was a war, a battle between brilliance and breakdown. Behind the flashing cameras and screaming crowds was a man stitched together by painkillers and silence. What began as a cure turned into a curse. The pills dulled the pain in his back, then dulled his mind, then dulled everything. Toward the end, Elvis was walking a tightrope between lucidity and delirium, between presence and oblivion. Sleepless nights, panic attacks, sudden tremors, gaps in memory so wide they could swallow whole years. He became a ghost in a gold suit, shimmering on the outside but vanishing on the inside. Behind every glossy photo of Elvis strumming a guitar or flashing his trademark smile lies a story unspoken, a truth darker than the limelight could ever reveal. When the curtains closed and the last cheer died away, he was left alone, haunted by the very echoes that once lifted him to glory. "I just want to live like a regular person," he once confided. But regular life was never in the cards. He was the king, the symbol, the myth. And that meant his every breath, every step, every heartbreak was under scrutiny, watched, dissected, demanded. And the cost? A soul constantly bleeding. A heart that never truly found rest. When Elvis Presley died, he didn't just leave behind records and rhinestones. He left behind a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when humanity is swallowed by myth. The bathroom where they found him wasn't just a scene of tragedy. It was the final battlefield of a man who had run out of ways to escape himself. He died not for lack of love, but because the demons inside him had grown louder than the music. He was not just a success story. He was a warning, a living, breathing monument to the price of greatness. His life teaches us that even the brightest lights flicker, that fame is no cure for pain. And that behind every legend is a man just trying to stay alive one more day. Today, Elvis still lives, not only in vinyl grooves or black and white footage, but in the hearts of those who see past the glitter. Those who recognize the human cost behind the crown. He endures not because he was flawless, but because he was real. Because pain has a voice, and sometimes it sounds a lot like a southern drawl crooning in the dark. And when we trace back his story, follow the highway of heartbreak, detour through desire, and circle the labyrinth of his mind, we can't help but mourn the man who lit up the world yet was left to wander through its shadows. He was a child of light and darkness. A king crowned by circumstance. A man full of dreams, haunted by wounds no one could see. And when that voice hits its final note, when the last lyric fades, we understand something profound. A life may be brief, it may be broken, but a song can live forever. Elvis Presley, the king of rock, the man, an eternal legend.